Hi everyone, I'm John, and today we're going to be looking at choosing a microphone for your didgeridoos. Not necessarily the easiest task, but hopefully it'll give you a couple of ideas to maybe help you kind of consider what you're going to get. I have done a couple of previous videos on mic placements, part 1 and part 2, a couple of years ago, so I'll put a link to the description, YouTube description as well on that. Anyway, so I'm going to be talking about dynamic condenser microphones, and I'll mention ribbons as well. I'm going to just start off with, you know, how do you choose what microphone to use? Right, I'm going to just start off on a brief construction about the construction of microphones, because that actually tells you a lot about how they're going to sound. So let's start off with, I've got this is a microphone I made from a capsule. I made it myself by buying a capsule and sticking it in a body, wiring it up. Could be any dynamic microphone. It's a dynamic microphone. In this capsule here, you'll see here in the capsule, inside there's like a diaphragm, like a membrane. There's a permanent magnet, and there's a coil of wire, which the diaphragm is attached to the coil of wire, which vibrates backwards and forwards, which gives you the sound. So if you're playing your didge or playing an instrument, the sound waves hit the end of the inside here. They hit the diaphragm in there. The coil goes back and forth over the permanent magnet, induces a voltage into the coil, and that sends a voltage down the wire into the preamp stroke interface, and that gives you the signal, which is then boosted in gain. Now the voltage that's generated is the sound waves converted into electrical energy. So you got it traveling down the I'll just put that down. So you've got it traveling down into the preamp, ready to be, you know, sorted in the signal chain from there. So that's really briefly a dynamic microphone construction. You've got condenser microphone that's built on, so the dynamic is built on the electromagnetic principles, you know, electromagnetic induction. So on the condenser microphones, you've probably heard of condenser microphones. They're actually capacitor microphones, means the same thing, and that's built on a different principle where you've got like this membrane. You won't be able to see it in here. I'm not going to take this apart, but inside you've got like a capacitive plate there, and multi-pattern microphones might have dual plate there, or membrane, front and back. So that works on more of the electrostatic principle. So basically you've got a sort of a back plate which this membrane vibrates against. They often use gold sputtered mylar sort of material as membrane, and basically when that vibrates backwards and forwards, same you're playing your didgeridoo or instrument, that will vibrate at a certain frequency. All the harmonics and things go into the microphone, and again are converted into an electrical signal down the wire. And all a capacitor microphone does as well is it transforms the high impedance of the capacitor sort of impedance setup, and then it converts it to a lower impedance so that it can you know, be used in a preamp. And that's what the electronics do in a condenser microphone. And also the signal tends to be a lot louder, so that's why with a dynamic microphone you have to often boost the gain up. Hence with a SM7B you have to sometimes have a cloud lifter or something to lift the gain up, whereas with a condenser microphone it has more gain, so you don't have to turn the gain up so much on your preamp or your interface. So now, how does this help us understand what the sound differences are between the two microphones? Well, a dynamic microphone, let me see if I've got this is the inside of a dynamic microphone capsule, and there's a tiny little coil of wire there, and there's the magnet there, and when the diaphragm's pushed backwards and forwards, as I said, it induces a voltage. But it's because of the construction of the dynamic microphone as a whole, with the membrane and everything, it's got more mass to it. It's heavier, you know, it's more mass, it's slower in its operation to a capacitor microphone, which is much faster. In other words, the condenser microphone has a much better transient response. So dynamic microphones tend to round off the transients, right? Now, don't worry if you don't quite understand this at the moment. I'm going to translate it into sound terms in a minute, regarding with the didgeridoo. So basically what that means is, so let's just say a dynamic microphone, then when you're playing, let's just say you're playing your didge, it's not going to capture the very, very spiky transients or the very fast transients in your didge playing. Let's just say you've got little bits of your playing, you know, it could be percussive playing or something, a really fast burst or something, and you want to capture all the transients. Well, the dynamic microphone is going to round them off a bit. Now that might be really useful. So it might be negative if you don't want to round those transients off, or it could be useful if you do, if you actually, because that could kind of smooth those transients out in a way, almost compress it to a degree, in a kind of way, just round them off. Now, with the condenser microphone, it's going to capture the spikiest detail, you know, the most, all the transient, you know, impulse. It's going to capture that really, the fastest and the most nuanced aspects of your playing. So that's why condenser microphones have a really good high-end frequency response. So you'll find that, you know, condenser microphones can go up to 20 kilohertz, you know, up here. You know, you get on the 0 dB line, they're on a frequency response graph, they'll go up there, or it'll go up, if it's flat and neutral, it'll go like that. But it can capture really the top end frequencies, whereas a dynamic microphone, well, it might be rolling off from 15k or something, or 16 kilohertz. And that's the limitations of a dynamic microphone, because it can't capture those very, very tiny high frequencies because of the mass of the dynamic microphone. So that's where a condenser might be invaluable to you if you want to capture this kind of this higher end frequency response. So in other words, what happens is the condenser or a capacitor microphone captures more detail, the high-end detail, and it just captures more detail because of its transient response, and therefore it can also be more natural sounding in the sense because you can get a flatter frequency response from a condenser microphone than you can from a dynamic microphone. With dynamics, you tend to have like a bump up here, and you know, it might roll off there a little bit here on the bottom end. But with condensers, you can get some quite, you know, pretty flat, and particularly the small diaphragm condensers can be quite flat frequency response and quite natural sounding. So keep that in mind. And now, how does that translate in sound even more? So let's just say you're using a condenser microphone. Why would you be using it? Well, when you listen to Ash Dargan's playing style, he uses he's got these kind of overtones, you know, I could call them area overtones, you know, the overtones that you hear in a lot of didge playing. Now, to capture those overtones, you're going to use a condenser microphone, because although a dynamic might capture the overtones, it's not going to capture it as well as a condenser. You know, a dynamic's not going to capture it as well as a condenser microphone, because the condenser's going to capture the detail more. It's got more extended frequency response. It's got more detail capture. It can capture detail more accurately. And therefore, when you listen to his playing, a condenser mic would be most suitable. The sound engineer who I had a conversation with, you know, Nigel Pegram, he used a TLM 170 on his playing. So that's quite a high-end microphone, you know. But it worked on Ash Dargan's playing, and it's world-class recordings, you know. this is really the main thrust of this video, because I could go on. There's so much I could talk about in terms of different elements of different microphones. It just become way overcomplicated. And I was going to introduce other elements of like room sound, but it's just going to be too much. So we'll just briefly hint on something of that. But keep mainly in mind that if you've got a dynamic microphone, you're not going to capture those nuances, those subtle nuances, that kind of refined. And with condensers, you can also get very smooth top end sound. Now, not with all condensers, some have a harsher top end sound, higher frequencies up here. They might be a bit harsher. So different condensers, are better or worse in that respect if you want a smooth top end. So keep that in mind. With a dynamic microphone, you're not going to have that top end up here, this top end frequency extension, and it's not going to capture such a natural sound as a condenser can. Not to say that it can't capture, a dynamic can capture a natural enough sound from a didge, because it also depends on your ear and how you're listening to it. You might just prefer the dynamic anyway and think, well, that sounds better to my ears than a condenser. And it might suit your didges or your style of playing to have a dynamic, if you've got a really powerful didges and they're really full-on sort of sound and you've got this raw energy coming, you might find a dynamic works really well, if you want that kind of capture. And and if it rounds the transients off a bit, you might just prefer that to the condenser that's capturing every nuance that actually might bring out something in the didge that you don't want to hear. It might be bringing out the most subtlest of sounds that actually are not good to hear from that didge. You know what I mean? So it's like there's pros and cons of condenser microphones. It's a bit like with vocal microphones. In studios, sound engineers will, on occasion, might choose a Neumann, say U87, or might be something else. But that's a pretty popular, well-known microphone, high-end microphone. They might choose that. In another instance, with one voice, in another instance with another singer, they might choose, say, a £200 microphone. Might be a dynamic, might just sound better. So you've got to think that some microphones do a better job with certain voices in that sense. So that also corresponds similarly to the didgeridoo. You'll get dynamics and condensers that will just work better on certain didges, and it depends on the style of didge. So it depends on the sound characteristics of that didge. So when it comes to dynamic microphone, they are, they're a lot cheaper, obviously. They're not, condensers can be quite expensive, although there's a lot of good value condenser microphones out there these days at a budget end. So so there is that option. But so I think that so that's the main thing. Just keep in mind the mass of and the weight of the kind of dynamic microphone lends itself to that less nuanced sound that you're going to get in a condenser. And by the nature of its construction, the capacitor microphone will have that ability to have a nuanced sound that you may or may not want. So there we go. Also, capacitor microphones need phantom power, which you would switch on from your interface. So that's pretty straightforward. There is the polar patterns thing with microphones, and dynamics are typically cardioid, which I've explained. I'm not going to explain the patterns here because I've done that on my previous mic positioning, mic placement video, so you can always check that out. But I'll just briefly go over it. You've got omnidirectional, which receives sound from all around. So if you've got a microphone here, sound is received on the omnidirectional pattern all around the microphone. Bipolar, you can if it's a switchable condenser mic, you can switch it to omnidirectional, usually to bipolar, and then also to cardioid. So that's 3 positions you'll get on a switchable. You can change the pattern. Bipolars, let's say that's the microphone capacitor inside. Bipolar would be that side and rejects from the side here. There's nothing at the side, and then that side. So you've got like a figure of 8. They're often known as figure of 8 pattern. And then cardioid is just the heart. You know, if the microphone's facing that way, then it's like no, actually we'll do it my way. Well, actually, it's just a figure. I can't really think of the way of doing it like that. It's just a heart shape. So you've got the directional pattern like a heart. So the sound entering the front will be picked up all the way around to the sides, but it'll be rejected at the rear. That's the main way of thinking about cardioid. Let's just quickly mention live microphones. When you're using a live microphone, you can use a clip-on microphone for didgeridoo, and you can use a dynamic mic, or you can use a condenser mic. Doesn't matter which. Both are useful for live, and you get clip-on mics that are designed for live performances. So again, you know, you can have cardioid and I didn't mention a minute ago about hypercardioid and supercardioid. Basically all that is it's a tighter pattern in front, so it doesn't get so much sound in the sides so much. It really is a bit tighter, and it's also going to pick up at the rear lobe. So you've got that with hypercardioid and supercardioid. So that's that. So coming back to the live microphones, you could use, I mean, in the past I've used an AKG C419. It's now the 519, but it's got a bigger end on it, so it's actually harder to fit onto a smaller end didge. So I prefer the 419. The ATM 350, I think that's a really good live mic. It's a really good microphone. You know, it sounds more natural to me than the AKG. The AKG is good though, but I prefer the ATM. I just found it a bit more natural sounding. So there's all these things to think about, and it works well for live sound, and it's polar patterns, often tighter polar patterns work better for live sound, although you mic things up really close. Regardless of the proximity effect, that gets EQ'd out because of feedback. You don't want howling feedback. So, and also I mentioned those two mics, the DPA 4099, that I've never tried that, but they're really well made microphones, so you could always consider that as a live microphone if you wanted to try it. The other thing is, you can also, for live microphones, I use a Sontronics pencil microphone, and I rigged up my own gubbins to get it on the end of a didge, only because it picks the overtones up I play better, and it'll pick it much better than a dynamic can. That's why I would use that particular microphone, which will work better than the ATM 350. But the ATM 350 is good, so you can think of that for live microphone use. And there's others out there you could use. You know, there's lots you could try. So we've got the dynamics, we've got the condensers. Also, when I'm talking about condensers, remember it's picking up lots of detail that dynamics can't. So also the ribbon microphones, they pick up lots of detail as well, and because of its lightweight nature, it also picks up transients better than dynamic although it's a dynamic microphone ribbon, than what I call the electromagnetic dynamic microphones, the typical SM57s, the Audix i5s, all those microphones, which General Dynamics. The ribbons pick up detail as well. So this I think is one of the main key factors to think about when you're deciding what you want as a didge microphone, because if you have this knowledge of the construction of a microphone, its mass, and how it affects how fast the mic responds to your playing, it might help you decide, you know, because if you trying to look at all the different microphones and saying, well, which one would be better for your didges, and this is an absolute minefield. You know, you'll end up down a rabbit hole of like never finding out, you know, apart from trial and error. I will come to that. So one of the main things is, now what I was going to say, in studios around the world, they've found microphone workhorses that just work on, some work are more versatile than others and work on lots of different things. Others are more niche and they'll work on certain things better than others. Now, obviously, for our purposes, we're looking for something that's going to work on didgeridoo. And I think that, so when you're coming to decide, I think if you're a beginner, really what you want to do, you can look at recommendations by players that have got good results with microphones, because if you're a beginner and you don't know what to use and you're not a professional, you know, you haven't, because if you're a professional, you know the sound of your stick really well. You know the sound of your stick. You know it inside out. You know how it sounds there. You know how it sounds here. You know it sounds in a different room. You know its sound. But when you're beginner, or even moving towards beginner, towards intermediate, you're not going to be so aware of what you can get out of sticks or sticks. So to choose a microphone is like, well, how on earth can you choose a microphone? You're not there. So in a way, one of the best things to do is to go by recommendation and just choose an inexpensive microphone to get started. Like you could go for an SM57. A lot of players using the Audix i5, you could use that. You'll find some people might prefer one over the other. They've got different frequency response graphs. I'll come to the frequency response in a minute, because that's really, it can be important, you know. But I think as a beginner, you could choose an inexpensive condenser microphone, even though in a way dynamics could be better value for money because there's less in it, and you know, you could get a good dynamic capsule rather than having to pay for the electronics in a condenser. There are some really inexpensive condensers now that have really sort of come a long way, really, in budget terms. So I think what we'll do now, I will just briefly, no, right, let's go to the professional player now. So that's for a beginner. So if you're a professional player and you're not so experienced with microphones, you might have a microphone, you might want to upgrade, or you might have no microphones and it'd be your first mic. Well, you could either still buy an inexpensive microphone, or you could go for something slightly better, you know. I'd hesitate to buy something really expensive, even if you're a good player, because, you know, really expensive, like go high end, because, you know, you've got to think about what room you're recording in and whether it's going to work in that room. And I will just briefly touch on this. A small room is much harder to get a good recording out of a microphone than a large room. In a large room, really, you've got little problem. You've got no problems with mic. You've got lots of different possibilities of miking placement, where it's going to be. You haven't got bass frequency problems in a small room. If you're going to try recording in there, you know, you're going to have low frequency problems, and you're going to have lower mid problems because of all the reflections of the sound of your didgeridoo generating the energy in the room. You know, it's going to be an issue. So let's just say you're a pro player and you want to try and get some decent recordings, you might still be better off with a dynamic microphone. And if you haven't got acoustic treatment, you know, a condenser microphone might be a waste of time, because it's going to pick up more of the room sound. And if you buy a Neumann U87, for example, or a TLM 170, it's going to pick up the nuances of the room, and it's going to sound terrible without acoustic treatment. So yeah, so I'm not going to say any more about that, because you will only know by trying. But as I say, you need acoustic treatment if you're going to get a high-end microphone in that situation. So you're better off, if you're starting off with microphones, is not to go too high in cost and experiment, start to see what you can get, because you should be able to get a good recording out of lower cost condensers, as much as, you know, dynamics starting at 80 odd quid. So that's that. So what else is there to say? Right. Right, here's an important thing. So let's just make a point about specialist kind of playing, like when you've got a Dubravko style of playing and you've got multi-dronists, you know, they've got really low frequencies. Well, if you're choosing a microphone there, you're going to have to take into consideration that with multi-drone and Dubravko's style of playing, if you're playing in that kind of style with low frequencies, you're going to need a microphone that does reproduce the low frequencies well. So basically, now I'm going to come to frequency response and the usefulness of it and tonality of a mic, because this is the other part. So frequency response, if you look online, I'm not going to put any graphs up here. I've got some graphs, I think, in my previous mic shootout unearthed video. There's a couple of graphs, you could look at those if you wanted to, or in my mic placement videos. But basically, if you look up frequency response graph of a particular microphone, you can choose any mic. Hopefully you can find the frequency response graph. You'll see there'll be like a line, 0 dB line, and then it'll go above the dB line and below the dB line. So let's just say, you know, down here, you're coming down to 100 Hertz and it suddenly rolls off, you know, starts rolling off. Okay, that's showing you it's rolling off the low end frequency. So you're going to start losing the bass there. Let's just say you're going up to 1, 2, say 3K here, 3 kilohertz, and you're getting a bump there, and maybe even 10 kilohertz, you're getting a bump there. Well, that's what microphones do, you know, dynamics and condensers. Although, as I said before, you can get flatter responses with condensers, so you can keep that in mind for a more natural sound. But what that's telling you is that if you've got this bump in the top end, let's just say you like the sound bright, if you've got a bump here in the 2, 3, 4, 5 kilohertz region, it's going to give you a brighter sound. Now the SM7B isn't hyped up so much there. That's why it's darker sounding, and it levels quite flat. And the SM57 drops off at 200 Hertz down here and starts going off, so you're going to lose more there. The SM7B is flatter and then drops off, so you're going to keep more bass on the SM7 and less top end. That's why it's a darker sounding mic. And also the tonality, think about it in terms of, right, do I want a microphone that's flat, more neutral? Do I want one that's a bit more hyped up here because I like a brighter sound? You know, it's subjective. It's highly subjective what you are going to choose. And if you do, then you're going to choose that. If you don't, and you want it, or if you want it darker, you might even choose a ribbon mic, because ribbon microphones roll off a bit on the high-end frequencies, and they tend to be darker, very natural and detailed as well. So there's that to think of. So you can think in terms of, like, what kind of sound do you want? This is the thing for your didgeridoo playing. It's like, what do you want? You know, are you playing punchy? And you might be playing all round. You might be a versatile player. So it's trying to get a microphone that's going to work as on your didges, the sound of your didges, on your style of playing as a whole. And it's trying to find a mic that's going to work the best as it can on all those different ways, or what you're looking for. And you might just prefer a brighter microphone than a darker microphone. So that's a subjective thing that only you know, and no other player can tell you. You know, you can get recommendations from microphones, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they can't tell you subjectively which one you're going to like. And this is the limitation of any recommendations or any reviews, to be honest with you. When you trial a microphone, is to test it, get it in different mic positions in the room. You know, try it different positions, find a place in the room where you think, oh, that sounds better, and then try different positions around the microphone. Place the microphone, get the didge placed in one place, get it on a stand. Either get a reflective surface or not. You don't need to use a reflective, so you can try it with or without. And then get your mic on a didge stand, and then get your mic placed and start placing it. You know, I've gone through this in the mic placement videos. As I said, I'll put a link in the video description. get your mic placement to try it, get the best position you can, and if it's still sounding really rough, you know, let's just say it's sounding too boomy, even though you've got it, you might have it spaced back a bit. Now, do a little test, do a little roll-off test, roll off the high frequencies. So let's just say you've got an F key didge 87 hertz fundamental frequency, and it's sounding really poor, and you think, this microphone doesn't sound any good. Well, roll that fundamental off, roll it off, just roll it off in a rough and past it, and keep going, and listen to the mid frequencies, you know, just above the lower mids up to the mid frequencies, and then you'll hear the high end too, and that'll give you a much better picture or much better understanding of how that microphone really sounds. Because at the end of the day, you know, although you're trying to get the best EQ from the mic position straight out of the door, if you do a high pass test like that, it will give you an idea whether that mic's going to work for you, because you can then EQ it in the door and think, okay, it doesn't sound good without any high pass, but when you high pass it or EQ it like that, it's sounding really good, and that can make a difference. So don't think you've tried a microphone raw, no roll off, because it might sound absolutely terrible because of the proximity effect. You see, I've talked about this again in the mic placement videos, part 1 and 2. Can't remember which one I did the proximity testing, but I did a proximity test in one of the videos. You'll see where I start off at a certain distance and get close, and you'll hear the bass and the proximity increase. So anyway, that's one consideration, I would say, for doing a test. So the key thing with microphones is trialing them, because the frequency response can help you determine how bright it is and that. But to be honest with you, you could have 2 flat frequency response microphones and they'll still sound different, you know. And it's because that's why you've got to try. That's why you've got to try them. You know, you need to find a way of trying different microphones. You could either see if you could borrow a microphone of a friend or a couple of microphones, and get it in your room. If you've got a small room, try it in there. You know, try it in there. You could order, say, 3 microphones. Use a bit, if you've got any savings, use a bit of your savings. Order 3 microphones that aren't hugely expensive and try them out. You know, you could try the SM57, you could try the Audix D4, see which one you prefer. You could try the one I use, the Audix D4. It's more of a drum mic, beautiful on bass sounds. You see, that's the thing about the D4. It's really nice on bass. You know, there's lots of different mics you could try. You could try some of the Lewitt mics now. You could try condenser, some of their budget condenser mics, which have been very well reviewed. Gives you an idea, and it's just a matter of trialing them. So what you can do is, if you order them from a mic shop, you can send the 2 back you don't want and keep the 1. See, that's how you get the cost down. And at one stage I ordered 5. I remember the most I ever ordered was 5. They weren't high-end mics, you know, so I wasn't spending thousands, but I think I had to spend some of my savings and spend about £1,000 on the 5 mics, different costs, and I narrowed it down to 1. You know, I got the one I wanted. That might have actually, I can't remember which one that was. That was too long ago now. Anyway, so you could go to a shop and try it, but the trouble with that is, if you can't try it in your room you're recording, it might sound very different, you know. And if you're, you know, once you must start placing microphones, keep in mind that with condensers you will want them spaced back a bit. You know, you don't want them really close because they don't really sound so good like that. Dynamics you can put up closer, but I still like mine back further, placed back, and you'll get more room sound. So if you are doing that and you have got room sound, then you've got to consider how it's going to sound in your room. So that's the problem with trying it in a mic and somewhere else. I hope that the comparison between dynamics and condensers, you know, one of the main 2 mics to think about, and how it's made, and that might give you some idea of what you might lean towards, you know, and then you can sort of go from there. Anyway, I think that's about all. Have fun checking it all out. That's all for today.